driving factor in increasing his school's annual performance report. As a result, he was recognized by the Missouri Association of Elementary School Principals in 2016 with the Exemplary New Principal Award. In 2017, he defended his 132-page dissertation and feature-length documentary on the topic of Missouri's student transfer law, a law that forces unaccredited school districts to pay the tuition and transportation costs for students who decide to transfer from their home district to attend an accredited school district. After 9 years in urban education, he has transitioned to a suburban school district in the fall of 2017. He is currently serving as the Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources for Kirkwood School District and an adjunct professor. He is the author of a wonderful new book called How to Achieve Educational Equity, co-founder of both Black Males in Education St. Louis and eduopenings.com. His perspective and focus on remaining student-centered yet equity-focused has made him an emerging, sought-out speaker and consultant. Dr. Field's unapologetic leadership and authenticity played a key role in being recognized as the 2020 National Elementary Distinguished Principal from Missouri. And many of you know I am a teacher myself and would not be the teacher I am without Dr. Fields. He completely changed my life. So without further ado, Dr. Fields.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your kind introduction, Amanda. What she did not speak to is for some of those accolades. I was just a leader. And so Steve Jobs said it the best: you find great people and let them tell you what to do, as opposed to finding great people and you telling them what to do. And so my skill set was to put people in great positions and watch them flourish. And so it was a tremendous honor serving as a mentor and ultimately a principal for Amanda. With that being the case, again, thank you for being here on the call right now. We do have Dr. Darryl Diggs, and I want to start there because there's a means to the madness. I wanted to talk a little bit about my story and something that I'm doing, and then turn it over to Darryl because I would not be sitting here in front of you if it wasn't for Darryl. A lot of times we talk about us going as far as we can in whatever field we in. I am lucky enough to be in the field of education, and I was going far, but it wasn't until I met Dr. Diggs in which we were able to connect and do some great work. In particular, we co-founded Black Males in Education St. Louis, but more so, what we did was we were each other's vessels in terms of just pushing each other, in terms of doing great work. There are only 2% of Black male educators across the country. That percentage in terms of number of Black males and Black females for that matter, leaving the field is tremendous. It's there. And so what we found is that Darryl will get a chance to talk a little bit. We both were on the brink of trying to figure this education piece out. And I'm glad we did, because some of the spectacular work that we are doing is a byproduct of that partnership. And so that's my brother. He does some amazing work. We push each other going back and forth. For those hip hop fans, if you think of the group Outkast, Big Boy and Andre 3000, we go back and forth. And so I have to put my best foot forward and we go back and forth. And so that's the great work. Now, to Amanda's point, I started my administrative career in the Riverview Garden School District. And in the Riverview Garden School District, not only were we unaccredited, but we were also in a situation where we were not doing well academically. There's no other way to put it. And so we worked closely with the state of Missouri in a lot of regards to increase learner outcomes. By doing so, there was the highest level of expectation related to what our students were supposed to do and what our staff members were supposed to do. I don't think it's an understatement, Amanda, by saying there was a lot of pressure to move forward. Now, that level of pressure and that level of accountability, what I found was that it was not there when I went into other more affluent school districts. And so this notion of educational equity really created itself. In my mind, if we're doing great work for kids and we were not a well-resourced district, if you're familiar with the Riverview Garden School District, 100% of our students qualify for free and reduced lunch through the Community Eligibility Provisions Grant. 98% of our students identified as Black. And we also had about 15-20% of our population qualifying for free and reduced price meals. And so with that first year, 20% of our students, my first year there as principal, I was there 3 years, 20% of our students moved to proficiency for ELA. We increased our APR, which is our annual performance report, by 200%. And I bring up these data points because all of the things that we've been told and all of the things that we have mental models in terms of what our students should and could be able to do, I cannot subscribe to such a notion because I've seen the contrary to that. Now, transitioning over to the Webster Grove School District as well as the Kirkwood School District, something happened. I saw a lot of resources. I saw a number of things academically that were going on, and I saw a different level of accountability from the state of Missouri, quite frankly. And so this notion of educational equity did come up. Now, in theory, educational equity is something that we like to talk about as it relates to a theoretical construct. You know, all kids should be able to have something and move forward, and they need it. And that's great. But what I found in my work was it has to be actionable. And when we talk about action within the context of educational equity, I created a definition. That definition turned into a book, which turned into more and more opportunities that I'm excited to talk about. And so my definition of educational equity is this. Educational equity is creating and or eliminating, again, action, creating and or eliminating policies, systems, and practices in schools that impact the experiences, outcomes, and access to resources for students from previously excluded groups. And so in my limited amount of time before I pass it over to Brother Diggs, that creating and or eliminating is very intentional because it comes to action. And when I talk about policy, systems, and practices, I think we all have a sphere of influence. And so that individual sphere of influence is important. But when we move forward as a collective, we're able to look at policies, we're able to look at systems, we're able to look at those practices, we're able to look at those things that govern our spaces. And by doing so, we tend to then look at the experiences, outcomes, and access to resources. Now, last but certainly not least, I did speak to it being previously excluded groups. I think for some time the term underrepresented was used, but I don't believe the term underrepresented adequately encapsulates what has happened. Let me give you a practical example. If I am a wrestling coach and I am looking for freshmen to show up and be on the team, we don't have enough people on the team for a wrestling team for our freshmen. And so if I went out, I'm recruiting, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, I can go back to the athletic director or the principal and say, hey, I tried, however, we can't do this because we don't have enough students, and so they are underrepresented. Well, as it pertains to what we're found is that the organizations, education as an entity, as a field, they have excluded. We have been complicit in excluding students from being able to do some of the things that we want them to do. So for example, when we talk about Black students, students who receive special education services and students who qualify for free and reduced price meals, typically, if you look at any data point, they're over-identified for special education services, but they're also represented in the discipline data, but we don't see them being represented as much in the gifted programming. And when we drill down more and more, we start to unpack and unravel this notion of not only implicit bias, but affinity bias. And there have been times where teachers, for instance, have a massive piece in identifying those students who will go on to advanced classes, and in this case, gifted classes. Well, when that is the case, if I only see my Black and brown students, for lack of better terms, in particular successful aspects, meaning as athletes, meaning as entertainers, but not as intellectuals, then that can show up in terms of how much I recommend them to be in gifted courses. And so my book goes hand in hand into looking at equity within an action-based phenomenon, within us looking at systems and some of the things that we're doing. A few highlights of the book in which I think is important to note so you can understand where I am on my journey is this. oftentimes when we're talking about schools and we're talking about systems, we do not talk about the students and having the students' role or understanding as it pertains to being able to dismantle structures and systems for inequities. And so I will read a brief snippet from the book related to my journey as a student. Now, as a student, I attended Riverview Gardens from kindergarten all the way to November of my senior year. Again, kindergarten all the way to November of my senior year. Well, as a teacher, I was in Riverview Gardens for 9 years before I transitioned. And so both times I left Riverview Gardens as a student and I went to Melville Senior High, which is vastly different from Riverview. And as a teacher, I went from Riverview Gardens to Webster Groves, which is vastly different. But as it relates to race and all of that, I didn't see much of it until a situation occurred as a student. And this is what I say in the book, and I'm going to read it to you verbatim. And I quote, Nicole said to me, "So I'll take your picture." I simply smiled and asked her, "How should I pose?" Now that I have your attention, let me pause and provide some adequate context. We were in a classroom, photography class, and the teacher said, get a partner and you all just take portraits of one another. And so her and I, we didn't know each other. I was the new kid, and so we worked together. And so she said, just basically pose and I'll take pictures. Well, she responded then after I said, how should I pose? She said, and I quote, just stand there and act like you're hanging from a noose or something. I did not verbally respond. For the first time that I could recall, my body was having an emotional response that was indescribable. And so I bring that up, and it's part of the journey section of the book because this notion of race, which could be taboo to discuss, is something that we have to grapple with and have to understand as we continue down the road of truly understanding educational equity. When we're talking about achievement gap, when we're talking about opportunity gaps, when we're talking about all of those things, it does straddle outcomes, resources, et cetera. It does straddle along the lines of the racial piece. And so in the book, I give a 5-step initial action steps for achieving educational equity. Step 1 being ask yourself, am I being complicit in educational inequities? Step 2, identify educational equities. Step 3, challenge the existing equity efforts and barriers to strengthen/systematize. Step 4, throw away superficial trash equity. Step 5, wash your hands. WASH is actually an acronym. It goes to get to work for the W. Anticipate resistance or pushback. The S is for strengthen your plan. And then the H is to help yourself, because for any of us who have been involved in equity work, in particular educational equity work, you have to make sure you're involved in taking care of yourself or you can burn out. And last but certainly not least, repeat steps 1 through 5 and bring a friend. Now, as I talk about some of these pieces, step 1, as it relates to ask yourself, how am I being complicit? That's actually a trick question, because it's not if you're being complicit, it's how you're being complicit. Through the book, I give some practical illustrations in terms of how I was being complicit as a teacher, as a principal, still being complicit as a district level administrator, and then doing some work at the state level, partnering with DESE, how in fact I was being complicit. And so another quote that I pulled out the book that I think does apply here is this: the most concerning, however, has been witnessing adults who were previously excluded as students either choose silence or attempt to justify inequities out of fear of being viewed as ungrateful by an oppressive system. And so again, I talk about the race dynamic, but being involved in not only BMESTL, which is Black Males in Education St. Louis, but also being involved in the Flip Job Fair. And essentially what that is trying to empower the job seeker more so than the employer, because we have data to suggest, myself, Darryl, and the whole entire BME system, organization rather, we have evidence to support that if we're able to show up as we are, if we're able to be our authentic self, there will be a level of retention in the workforce. Conversely, if we're not allowed to be our authentic self, if we're not allowed to show up as we are, then that can have an adverse impact. And we see how that's showing up with multiple people leaving the field of education. A few additional points as we continue to go through some of the work that I'm excited about. This whole notion, the number one question I would get more than anything as a principal, and I get it to a degree as an assistant superintendent, is this: Dr. Fields, we really want to address the achievement gap. How do we give those kids what they need? How do we give them what they need? And that's an important dynamic that comes up often. However, what I've learned is that I've been around students, especially the last decade or so, in a situation where I've studied this dynamic in terms of how we operate and how we support or how we don't support our kids. And what I found is that I have never, and I try not to speak in definitive terms, but I have never met a student who had more challenges than they had gifts. And I think that's important to note, because when we frame these things, we have to look at our students and we have to build on what they do great. I'm going to always bring up Amanda, because Amanda used to come to the office. We used to have conversations, and Amanda, please call me out if this is a fib, but we built on her strengths. These are some things I know you do well. Let's get those things going and let's move forward. I'm not going to have any teacher come in the office and I just automatically start going to the things that they just don't know because of our system or things that they're struggling with. And so it's a head scratcher as to why we do that with our students all the time. We automatically go what they don't have or what they don't need or why they won't be successful. And that is what we're deeming as a deficit model. We approach our kids within a deficit model standpoint, and that's something that I address in the book. And last but certainly not least, as I come to a halt, and then I'll transition over to Dr. Diggs, is this. If you were to ask me, well, Dr. Fields, you've written a book, you've done some other things. Where are we with educational equity? Do you believe it's going to happen? Do you believe we can address some of these things? And the phrase that I've coined as of recent has been that I am pessimistically optimistic. And when I say pessimistically optimistic, because of the buzzword nature of educational equity, because of some of the things that we've done in terms of our system, looking at kids through a deficit model, because of all of the lack of intentionality with some of the measures we've used, I'm pessimistic, but I'm also an optimistic person. And so an example of that may be, okay, many of our equity efforts are trash, and I know they won't get to what we're doing as a field, as a system, but I do truly believe in my heart of hearts that we can get better, and we want to get better. And that's something that I grapple with and I struggle with on a daily basis. And so there's also a portion of the book that speaks to having said that. And I say this, and I quote, I have come to the realization that all organizations can take the initial steps to achieve educational equity. Having said that, it hurts me to admit I do not believe educational equity as defined in this book will proceed beyond initial steps in most organizations. And part of the reason why I speak to that is really drawn out in the book. There's also an equity audit. I don't necessarily like equity audits or audits for that matter, but I like this one because it's more inquisitive, it's more so inquiry based, it's asking questions, it's reflecting, because we all have a sphere of influence and we all have work to do. And I think it's critically important for us to move forward and to be able to assist our students and give them what they need. When we talk about what they need, we can't move forward until we identify some of the barriers that they have. Yes, they have barriers coming from home, but we also have a number of barriers within our organization that we have to speak to. And so again, that's a lot in itself. It is a book that is getting some great reviews, and I'm excited about it. But more than anything, it's us walking in our truth. It's us using our voice, And it's us making sure that we're modeling that authenticity as much as possible. And as I opened up, I will say none of this would be possible without my brother, Dr. Diggs. And so, Amanda, if you don't mind, I'll go back to you so you can do Darryl's introduction. I'll take a step back. I need to go and grab some water too. And then after Dr. Diggs, I'll come back on for some Q&A.
That would be great. And there's some questions in the chat too,
Okay.
if you have a chance, and I will introduce Dr. Diggs. Thank you, Dr. Fields. Dr. Diggs started his career in education as a middle school science teacher and transitioned into an assistant principal at a local high school. And over the years, he has presented for the Midwest Educational Technology Conference and ISTE, which is another technology conference, and recently gave a TED Masterclass talk. Currently, he writes for a personal blog to address the art of teaching and learning, and he is the co-founder of Black Males in Education for St. Louis. Through creating a space for Black male educators, he also manages a newly founded nonprofit called EDU Conduits. And in 2020, Black Male Educators of St. Louis was awarded the Challenging Convention Moonshot Award presented by Launch Code. As a co-founder to EDU Conduits, the organization will soon launch a platform to allow for small businesses to market their professional development educational entities, to post positions and find candidates, and freelance opportunities for educators. EDUopenings.com will be the next endeavor for him. And Dr. Diggs is currently the proud principal for Hardin Middle School in the St. Charles City School District. So without further ado, Dr. Diggs.
I appreciate that. Thank you for that introduction, Ms. Steen. And also thank you to all of you for being on this call this evening. And the book and also the information that Dr. Fields began with, and also will wrap back around to answer some of those questions, is a very hot topic across our city as well as our state and country. You know, very often we hear about what is equity, what does equity look like, but then that word or phrase or term within itself always go back to an image that I'm pretty sure all of us have seen in some shape or form, where you have kids looking at a baseball game behind a fence, and some of them standing on various levels of boxes. And so when Howard gets back together, he will speak about what that image means as regards to equity, but also the term within itself, trash. I'll give a little bit of insight behind that, and then he'll wrap it up. But when we think about trash, it is symbolic of things that we throw away, items that are not good for the body, things that are detrimental to our growth and sustainability. Bless you, Miss Louise. And so with that said, when we think about equity in a context of, are we breaking down barriers? Are we creating avenues for students to be themselves, give them the best opportunity for outcomes? That in itself is us breaking down the barriers and creating thus true educational equity. And if we aren't actively doing that work, then in and of itself, we have to say exactly what it is. Number one, it's not good for kids. And we use the term or the word trash as symbolic to what is not working best for students, what's not working in the best interest of systems and structures in education and in classrooms. So again, thank you, Ms. Steen, and also Dr. Fields for that introduction. Now, what I will say is that I would like for us to go back for just a moment. I first started cutting my teeth in this work in a professional development opportunity through the state of Missouri, where they send educators off into the woods to learn different orienteering type structures and strategies and skills. And so this was very new for me. It's not often that I will go hiking or I will get lost in the woods and then try to find my way. And this was that moment where I met a young man who looked like me, because we're not very often seen in the same place, number one, and in the woods, number two. And so that's how I met Dr. Fields. And so he was one of the leaders in this Missouri development system. And as we're learning these different initiatives to gather these types of skills, it dawned on me that this is somebody that I needed to know, because it's not very often that you'll have educators in the same space, let alone the same school district. For example, across the country, Black male educators comprise of 2% of all educators in the country. And when I looked at the numbers and tried to figure out this from a local standpoint, across the state of Missouri, Black male educators comprise of just over 1%. out of all educators in the state of Missouri. And so with this knowledge and information, it's important that we connect and we get together and learn from one another. You know, it's vastly important that we're able to lean in, mentor, grow, and advocate, you know, for the importance of Black male educators. Now, there was a moment where I went to an elementary school in a previous school district, and I was talking to the elementary students just about perseverance and how they could just, you know, do their best, you know, be their best. And they were all elementary school kids from 2nd grade to 5th grade. And it dawned on me after I was done speaking with them, which was a phenomenal opportunity, is that these young kids can graduate from their school system, elementary, middle, high, without the influence or perspective or the gift or opportunity to learn from someone that either looked like me or was a person of color. And so I'm chewing on all these ideas, speaking with the young people, and then something happened. I found myself on Instagram. All right, I was it was during lunch duty. I'm sitting with, you know, my students, making sure that they're, you know, getting all their meals and, you know, they're eating. And at my high school at the time, as I'm sitting there monitoring, one of my students comes up to me and says, "Dr. Diggs." I'm like, "Hey, what's going on?" "Dr. Diggs, you're on Instagram." I'm like, "What do you mean I'm on Instagram? I try to lead a private life. You know, I don't want to, you know, be out there too much." And so as she shows me her phone, I am on her phone, my image, painted with a very red filter with the N word written across my face. And so I'm like, where is this? How did this come to be? And so she allowed me to look at her phone, and to my awakening, it wasn't just one image, it was multiple. And not only were the images there with derogatory terms, phrases, and words on my face, there was also comments, and then there was likes and thumbs up, and just the uplifting of this hurt that I was seeing on Instagram. And so, you know, very quickly, I felt a very strong sense of um, isolation, pain, definitely felt alone. And so that in and of itself just galvanizes a spirit within myself where I felt like education was not for me at this point. At this time, I had been in education for about 12 years. And what hurt the most is that as I started looking through the comments as the things that were being said, a lot of these students were my students. They were the kiddos that I had taught. They were the young people whose families I knew very personally. And so I remember it like it was yesterday. I drove home. I'm talking to my mom. First of all, happy Mother's Day, belated Mother's Day out there. As I'm talking to my mom and I'm sitting in front of my house, she says to me or asks me the question, "Darryl, what would you do if this were to happen to your sons?" And so in that moment, that's when I reached out to Dr. Fields that I met several months prior out in the woods orienteering. And then at that moment, him and I wanted to create a space. And as we know about the human condition and about community and about faith, is that there must be an opportunity for space for people to fall in and find each other. And so what we wanted to do is create an opportunity for other Black males in education to come together for the simple fact to support, mentor, advocate, and develop one another. That's how BME STL was created and how it was founded. And we approached 2 years of its founding about 4 days ago. And what's phenomenal about this is that creating space isn't new. Creating a foundation isn't new. Starting something out of nothing is not new. But what's incredible is that if we're able to connect the community with a perspective, then at that moment, we can have this strong belief about ourselves that we're doing something for other people. And that in that doing of something, we must incorporate action. Okay. And so, what does that look like? And so, Fields and I, we developed a system to where we wanted to bring people together, have conversations about race and policy, have conversation about inclusion, diversity, and equity. We wanted to also create an avenue for people to share their stories. And so we co-authored 2 books at this point. And again, within 2 years of time, we were able to make this work. But it's not about us, it's about the space. And so as we're here together, in this space, there's something that I want to share with you, if I may. Long time ago, I happened to be with a different group of peers. And when you get guys together, it could be one of two things. And sometimes it could be dangerous. And when we were together, we asked ourselves, hey, wouldn't it be cool if, right? And so if you were to finish that sentence, it could be like something really crazy. And so we decided to compete in the sport of triathlon, right? And so that was our thing. We were like, wouldn't it be cool if we swam and we biked and then we ran? And at the time, I thought that was very crazy. And the reason why I'm bringing up this story in relation to BME STL is because in the sport of triathlon, there are very few people of color in the sport. During my first race, I went out to Creve Coeur Lake. I know, Asian carp, it's a real thing. And while I'm at the water's edge and I'm scanning the landscape, I'm the only one there that looks like me. Now, what's important about this story is that as we approach the water's edge, we must be really cognizant of the space in which we're in, but also what are we daring to do? I was daring myself and daring others that looked like me to jump into this water. First of all, who does that? And then two, who's willing to do something to where they can't see very far up their arm in a murky lake, right? Now, this story has a direct correlation to BME STL because in our daring, um, in our fear, we must have our fear fuel our purpose. For me, the sport of triathlon, my purpose was to show my kids and also those that look like me that, hey, you can do this too. But in education, my purpose fueled what came next. It became a nonprofit called EDU Conduits. It became a website called EDU Openings, which we'll release momentarily. And as we sit with other people, I must ask you this question, if I may. And this is something that I would love for you to write down, if you can. And it is this. It is, what can I do with my influence and my platform? What can I do with my influence and my platform? Now, all of us are in a position where we have influence on somebody, over someone, or some other organization. And in that influence, what are you willing to do with it? For me, my influence was to make sure that there was an opportunity for my two boys to grow up in an educational system that did not look like the one that I grew up in. That's what I wanted my influence to be. Collectively, Fields and I, we would like to use our influence to create an avenue for hiring, retention, as well as professional development and freelance work for educators. Now, if we're able to use our influence to positively impact the landscape of education, then we've done our job. Again, it's not about us. Now, here's something else. What are we willing to do with our platform? Many of us have either, worked a 9 to 5, retired from that 9 to 5, or, we're helping somebody else, with their platform. What can we do with that to benefit and accelerate someone else? Now, if I may, I spoke about community. There's a lot going on in the community right now. There's a lot happening in the legislature right now. There are school districts in turmoil for a wide variety of things. So what can we do with our influence to impact that? What can our platform be for good? There's a book called Where Do We Go From Here by Dr. King. It was his last book that he wrote prior to his assassination. Where do we go from here? And in this book, it's phenomenally written. It's almost, well before its time, which is something that I would encourage everyone to pick up if you don't have it already. But in this book and in this literature, he speaks to directly what's happening in the school system, what's directly happening within our political sphere, and then also the influence we have to benefit young people. Now, with that said, there's this thing that we all need to be cognizant of, and that's called the struggle, right? How often have we heard of the phrase, the struggle bus, right? Now, the struggle bus is an idea that no matter how hard we try, sometimes like the day is long and it's almost like a full moon on us all the time, and things just can't go right. Well, that's what I call the struggle bus. When we first went on lockdown due to the pandemic last March or 2 Marches ago, I felt that the struggle bus pulled up to everyone's home and everyone's house all at the same time. Now, in this on this bus, again, what are we willing to do to be the driver to correct its trajectory? That's a challenge that I'm posing to my school. I'm at Hardin Middle School in St. Charles County, and for us, it's important that we do two things. And I haven't spoken out loud about this yet with my staff, but we have two opportunities. We could either continue to sit in the bathwater or drink a different flavor of Kool-Aid. And this is what I mean by that. So stay with me. When you sit in the bathwater, sometimes you sit in the bathwater too long and you tend to become the water, right? And eventually you create a ring around the tub, but you tend to stay in there. But why is that? So what I'm encouraging my staff to do as we jump into year 2 is to get out the bathwater or change the water, right? We must change our mindset, change the way we think and change the way we believe, and also change the way we teach for the betterment of kids. So that's what I mean in my bathwater analogy. Guys, let's revitalize the system, change out the water, or find new water. Now, when I mean by Kool-Aid, we in my smaller circles, we talk about like, hey, you're drinking the Kool-Aid, but don't know the flavor. Like you don't know what you're doing, right? Now, with this Kool-Aid mindset, it's vastly important that are we pouring from the same cup into our kids of innovation, safety, educational equity, empowering them to be their best selves through social justice, inclusion, and diversity. And so, with that analogy of Kool-Aid and all of these things that I just mentioned, what are we doing to impact them by giving them our best? And so that's a message that I give often, to my staff and to my students. And then eventually I end with, being great. So team, as I'm, with you on this call and also, having these conversations with you, I think it's vastly important that we hone in on my question. What are we willing to do for others in regards to our influence and for our platform? All right, so something to think about. Now, before I transition to our next piece, are there any questions? Okay, give you a moment. Now, something else that I would like to mention, if I may, is that when it comes to leadership, there are many different types of leaders. Some that like to stand out in the front, and there's also those that would like to hang in the background and just be sure that we're, being that cheerleader. And so, with leadership, it's vastly important that we try to hone in on what does it look like around us, and then also who's at the table. If we're making decisions for individuals that do not look like us while we're at the table, then we need to change the seats, change who's with us to help us make these decisions. Again, right now it's not unknown, but there are decisions being made in school districts for individuals that are the voiceless, that aren't present, unfortunately. And so, with our influence and platform, what are we willing to do as we're sitting at the table influencing those that are around us and those that are marginalized, those are who are underrepresented in this work? Now, Dr. Fields mentioned something very eloquently about the gifts of our students are not widely seen. For example, I have a student who's in all self-contained classes, and I happen to witness her beautiful voice singing a Moana song. But how often are we able to see the diamonds that are in the rough because of what's happening around them? We must take that chance, be that influence, and also push against platforms that aren't adequately created for kids. And so that in and of itself is something that Dr. Fields and I are part of, is creating that space and that platform through our nonprofit, and also this this website that will be released very soon in EDU openings. You know, it's a chance for, you know, teachers to find their way and offer professional development. You know, that doesn't happen. Also to find jobs and also post positions, which is underserved. It's also a way for post-secondary institutions to be able to market themselves in a way to jump inside classrooms the best that we can. All right. So I see Miss Litz, let me read her. So one of the things our congregation does is adopt an elementary school in St. Louis City. In an ideal world, what would you think of a collaboration like that should look like to create the greatest value for our students there? I think that's an amazing question. And this is what I think. When we think about partnering, or when we think about adopting, I think it's vastly important that the congregation or the community has a perspective that is unified. So whatever that unity is to move forward, it would be vastly important that in a partnership, we all have the same vision, we all have the same motive. Because I've seen in other entities where misplaced energies can almost be as detrimental as not engaging at all. And so what I would be interested in is being able to have two entities partner together, but also meet at some point to really chew on and get to the root cause of what we could do better together. So that would be my thought. I think it's an incredible idea, a credible idea from the simple point of, if we're going to partner, what are we willing to do to give when it comes to that influence, in addition to the platform that we have here? So just something to think about. But I think that's great. So here's another piece from Bert. So I'm not clear what it looks like. Good question. So I'm gonna use triathlon as an example for that. So what does educational equity look like? So think about this. So in the sport of triathlon, people are under some misconceptions. Let me break that down for you. People believe and are misguided in the stereotypes when it comes to Black males or Black people in swimming. Let me explain. So the misconceptions or the stereotypes is that, one, the Black community doesn't like to swim, or that we can't swim. We're not part of triathlon because it's expensive. We're in poverty. And there's a disdain for swimming or health disparities. Like that's what's out there, right? So imagine if we were to use educational equity to tear down the barriers, policies, structures to that, to then allow for individuals to jump into the water, to vastly partake of education, and also for grand outcomes. Now, there's some history to this. Back in the day, actually not too long ago, in the 50s and 60s, there were public pools that were not available to the Black community, right? There were public pools that had broken glass thrown within them to keep Black communities of people out, right? So if we think about educational equity in a context of triathlon, swimming, all of these things, we're tearing down the fence. We're tearing down the policies that keep people out. We're tearing down the barriers and policies that also are keeping individuals from accessing education to its fullest. So to integrated schools who have resegregated over the last 15, 20 years, more Black, especially Black males in education, what do you do about that? So think about this. There's a term called white flight. I went to many North County schools because we just happened to transfer, but we didn't actually move. But in that, I lived in a neighborhood called Sacré-Cœur, which was across the street from Hazelwood Central. When I moved into the neighborhood, which was in 1992, my family was one of 3 Black families in the neighborhood, right? I've since moved, and my sister, she still lives in the house, but in the neighborhood, now it's almost all African-American, right? So what we have is that we have communities of people moving and shifting, but there's policies behind that, and that's called redlining. I would encourage us to look that up if we're unfamiliar. Redlining. Redlining was a practice throughout the government that only marketed certain areas or real estate agents to sell to certain people based off of income and also their socioeconomic status, but more so what they look like in certain areas. So for example, it's easy and quickly to see what's happening in our North County area versus West County. And then also if you go way out past St. Charles City, Wentzville, and all those other places. So in regards to, males in education, number one, education in and of itself has turned into, well, actually it didn't turn into, it was always a profession that was predominantly fielded by women. And so as we're starting to have more males into the profession, we're always going to be a step below and a step behind when it comes to white males versus black males, right? And we see that all the time when it comes to what's taught in schools, K-12, but also post-secondary. Now think about this. Why aren't we having conversations when it comes to like, hey, you could be an educator, you could be an engineer, you could be a doctor, but very quickly, hey, you could be an athlete, you can jump out the gym. Those conversations are more readily available, unfortunately, in our schools towards black males. If we were to look at the literature that's given and read in our libraries, very often you will not see black protagonists. And then again, we have to ask ourselves these questions. Why is that? It can be by happenstance, right? So again, I always go back to this question as I'm talking with adults, especially my teachers. What are we willing to do with our influence? What are we willing to do, again, with our platform? And again, there's examples of this all over the place when it comes to the movement of people through systemic, changes in laws and government and policy. We're seeing it right now with the exclusion of certain parts of history, right? I'm not making this up. I'm just telling how I see it. But again, I'm gonna go real quick, into the chat. So educational equity needs to start with the amount of money we spend per child. Yes, and I know that. And you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Now, in addition to that, we also have to think about property values. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, and he was saying he said, Diggs, sometimes people call me by my last name. He said, Diggs, think about it. When a community is in transition by the number of trees they have up in their neighborhood. I'm like, what do you mean? And he said, listen, if you're not seeing very many trees, the community is going to transition. And that's when you see a lot of people moving on. And I would be interested to know what those families look like as they're moving. Now, with that being said, there's also something else happening in North County. Think about this. When I lived there, we had a Kmart, we had a Shop and Save, we had a Schnucks, there was a Deerbergs down the street, and then another Shop and Save around the corner on Howdershell. There's only one market. We call those food deserts, right? And there has to be a reason why this is happening. It's not by happenstance. Something that we have to think about. And again, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but what are we able to do, willing to do with our influence, platform, and power? Let me see. There's another question. Oh, what is the ratio? So in my school district, I just found this out the other day. So in my particular school district, the percentages of kids have kind of stayed the same. We have a population of about 60, 66, 67% white students that flow into the district, but we have a growing population of Hispanic kiddos that have grown incrementally since like the early 2000s. And then also there's a good population of African-American families, but they're not growing as fast as my Hispanic families, right? Now, when I was at a previous school district, there was a declining number of African American families, but a growing percentage of other families of color, specifically those who are Bosnian, right, in a district that I came from. And so, with all these numbers, it helps me understand, like, hey, there's movement here. Now, in a previous school district, on one side of the district, it was predominantly like all students of color that were Asian. So I wonder why that is. Whereas on the other sides of the district, it looked totally different. So in regards to, white flight and movement, of families and kids, like it happens almost all over the place. But again, it's not by happenstance. Now, as I transition, and Dr. Fields will pick up in just a moment, there's something that I want to impress upon you, if I may. In the 2 years that Howard and I have been together doing this work, we wanted to be sure that we, again, wanted to create a platform for voice, to create a platform for those to share their expertise, their knowledge, but also how did they get to this vast and incredible opportunity of education. And so we co-authored a book throughout the region called Voices, Voices, VOICE. And in this book, it's the galvanizing of many different Black males from all over the place sharing their experiences and their expertise. And so if you're happen to be on Amazon, we can also send you some books, but you can find it on Amazon, Voices Volume 1 and Volume 2. Actually, I think I have Volume 2 right here. So what's incredible about this publication is that it gives us a chance to empower young people, because there's a couple student authors in the book. Now, the student authors, what's incredible is that they're high school students. How many students can say that they're a published author and they have, author credit with a book that they can pick up and give to other people, and they're earning a scholarship to their college or university? So, if I may, I want to read you a snippet as we wind down a little bit and Fields jumps back on. So in Volume 2 of Voices, I would like to read you this short snippet. And it's titled 2020 Vision, Do You See Me? The late Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. stated, "The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy." Writing has been my safe haven this year, in a year where I often had to keep my initial thoughts to myself. Expressing my thoughts and concerns through written form has been therapeutic. If I have learned anything the last 6 months, it has been that perspective is everything when faced with adversity. This is my 15th year in education and first year as a high school head principal. I would be remiss if I didn't say it's been unique, to say the least. Months before my official start date, I attempted to meet students through a Zoom call, and was abruptly interrupted by racial slurs, inappropriate comments from a few students who let this N-word in to be our principal. "We are going to hang him if he comes into our town." Several other racial remarks and unwarranted comments were shouted and written in the chat. I was able to reclaim control of the Zoom call and ultimately finish the meet and greet session. However, the damage had been done. A disappointing yet familiar reality set in. The role I had worked so hard to obtain had come with a major dose of racism. This left me thinking, what is my next move? How should I respond? Nonetheless, before I could gather my thoughts, the incident had already made local, regional, and national news. The headline read, "First Black principal meets racial confrontation as he meets with students." It was in that moment I had to decide if an experience like this was going to shake my confidence and ability to lead, or turn this controversial story into a learning opportunity for everyone. Now, his name is Dr. Jones. You can find him on the Kansas City side of the state, Platte County. Influential, amazing educator. And so for him, he was met with also some deep hurt, and in that hurt, it fueled his purpose. For me, in my Instagram story, that fueled my purpose. when it comes to Dr. Fields and he can, tell the story better than anyone. There were moments throughout his experience that fueled his fire to do something with his platform and influence for others. And so, with that said, we must find a way to do something and make something different and better for young people. And that doesn't have to be something that's cookie cutter. With this congregation, we have the power to affect many. Now, with that said, if I may, I would like to share this also in closing. When it comes to faith, we also must have an ability to kind of keep our head, on the horizon, right? We will have moments where things will be heavy. We'll have moments where we're not seeing the fruits of our labor, but we continue to keep going because we have this faith about us, right? But where does this faith come from? For me, my faith started by coming from a praying family. Hence, my mother. Darryl, what would you do if this were to happen to your kids? Think about it, pray on it. Where will this take you? And so in that, in and of itself, I believe it to be supreme divine intervention for us to get to this place in a short amount of time of 2 years. And so, with that, we can do all things, guys. We just have to be able to bring the community together, have a unifying perspective about us, to thus do this work and push forward in the same direction. And so there's an analogy that I use from this book called Boys in the Boat. And it's a book about the young boys that I think beat Adolf Hitler and his group during like World War One or so. No, two, excuse me. And in that effort, you have like all these guys in the boat, and their galvanizing spirit, as well as like their coach, they were able to push and pull in the same direction with the same amount of force and speed to get far. And in that's an analogy that I use, is that we all have to be in the boat, guys, facing in the same direction, pulling with the same esteem and speed, for us to get anywhere far together. And so with a congregation, with a group of people or an organization, like this is vastly important, for us to do this work. And so, again, I don't want to, skip over like if there's any questions, but are there any like thoughts when it comes to community having deep impact and what that could look like? Any questions?
So there are some questions and comments in the chat, Dr. Diggs. I don't know if you saw them or if you want me to read them. I can do that too. You tell me what you prefer.
Yeah, if you don't mind reading one off, that would be great.
Yeah, so one that we had was from Bert. Another issue is whether we're going to teach history, particularly minorities, that includes their story. Can you comment on the impact that parents and politicians have on the educational system in Webster Groves with regard to plans to give a more complete accounting of Black history in the U.S. since 1619?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that, and thank you, Bert. And that's a great question. So I read a lot. I read, different views of the news. I also take a look at the comedic slant on news. So Trevor Noah, I think he's, a gem to the community. But there's something that Trevor Noah said in his rendition of what's going on right now across the country in education in regards to teaching about race and history and all sides. And this is what he said. So I can't take this. But Trevor Noah said, hey, history will always be told in the view of the winner. Right. And so like when he said that, like it really made sense. So for example, like whatever the piece of history it is, if we take that same piece of history and read it from a European perspective or a South African perspective or just another part of the world, it will be vastly different. It may include the same players, but it's going to be different. And so as I think about, like, for example, Webster Groves or the Rockwood School District and what's happening in our legislature, to me, I go back to Trevor Noah. Is the history that wants to be told, is the history that wants to be suppressed in favor of whoever is the winner, Or is it to continue to suppress voice of others, right? Now let's think about it. I was flipping through my email this morning, and I was looking at who voted how on the particular bills that are on the floor before it goes to the governor. And for some reason, it is straight down the line. Now, I'm not trying to get political, but it looked like all the blue guys voted one way and all the red guys voted another way. And that's interesting. Again, why is that? Is it because of the viewpoint of history being told by the winner? And so that's something to think about. And so as I think about history being told to young people, I'm gonna use my kids as an example. They're 5 and 7. If my kids didn't have me and their mother, would they be getting a view of history that is watered down, whitewashed, and essentially trash? Going back to a word that Dr. Fields has in his book, How to Achieve Educational Equity. So are we telling a slant of history that is going to continue to suppress groups of people and their voice? If that's the angle, I don't want that history. I want the nitty-gritty truth, good, bad, or indifferent. Like, how come we're not talking more about internment camps that we had in the States? How come we're not talking more about redlining? How come we're not talking more about the war on drugs and why that was a thing? Why aren't we talking about the creation of the ghetto and why that was a thing? Like, how come we're not talking about that? And if we're not, kids are missing out on a history that is going to be repeated because we don't know, and it's on purpose. So, Bert, thank you for that.
So the next question we had was in regards to our congregation's partnership. We support the teachers, we help with school-wide events, and we try and tutor, and this was from Liz. But there are many restrictions on when and how we can work with underperforming students. We are only allowed to work with them during asynchronous ELA or English language arts time. Frankly, we can only show the kids that we care. We really can't make a difference in reading levels. Have you seen ways that partners can really make a difference for students? And Terry added that the Monroe partnership began and continues by asking those at Monroe how we can be helpful and trying to be responsive. I think people are interested in ways we can improve that partnership.
Mm-hmm. And so for us at BMESTL and through our nonprofit, the work that we are deeply involved in is through the symposiums that we have created. So the State of Black Educator Symposium, which we've had 2 thus far. The next one's going to be phenomenal next year in February. And so as we think about partnership, we must think about like the engine that we're willing to create to where we're giving back in a way that impacts the teacher, right? So for example, for us, we've created an avenue where teachers are able to be developed professionally, but also have an avenue to be empowered to give back to their kids in a way that they wouldn't otherwise through the school district that they're in. And so with our nonprofit and EDU openings website that will soon, come to fruition, this is a way for us to professionally develop, teachers and also groups of teachers with PD around like diversity, equity, but then also like anti-bias, anti-racism work. We created a memorandum of understanding that ties directly to inclusion, diversity, equity, and ABAR work. So it's been long since where the best way to partner with schools and kids and school districts is to create like mentorship opportunities, right? Where it's like after school, kids stay, we read books to them, or we help them type. Well, this is 2021. We have to think differently. Like kids are all over the place. Right now, students in their book bag or in their pocket, they have a supercomputer that rivals what we had in NASA decades ago that filled up a room, right? Like kids can connect across the world, quite quickly. So when I think about partnership in schools, what would help me, for example, at my school, is the ability to continue to show and speak to teachers about why they're important, but also what we need kids to know that might not be in their curriculum. For example, There's school districts out there that are really scared to show what their curriculum looks like in fear of what would happen to them in the news and the media. And that's the truth. But guys, if we can do what sometimes teachers can't, and we could probably go further. But that's for another time. So thank you for that. Miss Steen, is there another question in the chat?
I think that's it for now, unless other people have questions.
All right, good deal. So if I may, I want to transition real quick, and Fields, help me out with this, because this came up twice in the chat, and it's in essence, how do you characterize educational equity, that's what we really need to be working on, versus what's happening now and where trash comes in? Can you paint the picture for that for us, Fields?
I think, unfortunately, educational equity has been taken over by more so political stances. I think it's one of those buzzwords. I think when we think about critical race theory, part of what was heard when I listened to all 33 comments that were in Rockwood, there was this notion of not only critical race theory, but equity, diversity, like all of those terms, they're closely related. And so there's a level of pushback on it. And I think with leaders, they shy away from those terms. And so what we're seeing in the education space is that either I'm going to shy away from educational equity as any type of actionable piece, or I'm gonna play things safe as the way they are right now. And that is the dynamic that I'm seeing play out now. Again, based off the definition that I used in the book, and I'll put the link in the chat. Um, it has to be actionable. And when we talk about having Amanda be on the team and we made gains and we showed growth and they were all quantifiable, there were some people, unfortunately and fortunately for our kids, where I had to help transition to do something else. Um, Everyone isn't suited to be involved and to be critical of the work that we're doing with our kids. And so we have this notion that we can all just come together, kumbaya, and we'll get outcomes for kids. And there are some individuals who should be servicing our kids, but there are some leaders who shouldn't be leading this work. And so I think until we look at it with the lens of accountability, equity will continue to be a theoretical construct that falls short in the area of quantifiable outcomes.
Pamela, you're on mute.
How many generations do you think have to go before this really changes?
I think, great question, Pamela. For me, I can't speak for Darryl. I think we're constantly seeing the access to resources occur. And so for those, it does straddle around the racial lines, but it does straddle along the socioeconomic status lines as well. And so if my family, Black, white, whomever, if I have the resources to do some things, then we may be in a position where we can impact policy or impact things enough to the magnitude of my kids won't have any quote unquote major problems going through the school system. What I'm seeing is those kids who don't have anybody to advocate for them, or those kids who don't have anyone whose parents know the lingo, the terminology, and the structure of educational systems. Those are the kids that, if they check any of the boxes, free and reduced lunch, students of color receive special education services, those are the kids that we're seeing continue to fall back. And so I think as a collective, we have a long way to go, but we're seeing these individual pieces show up to have pockets of success, because even some of those super subgroups that are doing well, 9 times out of 10, they have a parent or some parents that knows the system well enough where they can push and do some things.
Appreciate that.
If I may, with everything that's happening right now through legislator, through government and resources being shifted, and then just the movement of people, plus still working through a pandemic that has affected groups of kids, I'm a little concerned. I'm a little concerned in how we've developed this cohort of young people, that we might not see the results of what's happening to them until maybe 5, 10 years from now. Because once they hit the workforce by age, I'm curious what that workforce would look like at that point. We've seen across our history in America going from the industrial age, into a more of a tech automated, technology based, era. With that shift, we also must be cognizant that we're also seeing a shift in the education of kids. I was talking to someone last August, like, hey guys, once we've proven that we can teach kids at home, we're probably not going back. Like we've proven that we can teach kids at home, at school, in a box. Uh, so we've created a dynamic that unfortunately we can't turn back the hands of time. And in regards to a pandemic, now when it comes to policy that's being enacted at the swoosh of a pen, that's dangerous, and we're gonna see the ramifications of this pretty quickly.
Don't you think more have suffered from being home with the parental lack of being able to work with the kids?
Mhm. I think
Don't you?
I think there's been struggle all over the place. For example, like there are families that cannot stay home, like they must work. There are families that aren't equipped like their kid's teacher to deliver great instruction. Now, for example, here's a true thing. When August rolled around, my school district and also districts that are on the other side of the river, St. Charles County, those were the only districts that were more so in person versus St. Louis County. What I noticed as a brand new building principal is that I had an influx of students coming into my building because we had an in-person option. Many of those families that moved over for my in-person option had young people that had special needs. And so, Ms. Pamela, to your question, I think that the pandemic in and of itself has shed a light that is so bright on many different aspects of family, young people, education, that we're going to see the ramifications like all over the place. And that's hard. That is hard. Now, I'm gonna be honest, like I'll take all the kids, but we also have to be cognizant of like what's happening um, when we make these decisions. I'm not saying, hey, being open is great or in person, virtual, whatever. Like, I mean, it is what it is. But from a leadership standpoint, are we prepared enough to make tough decisions and to support all that arrive, no matter how they come? And not everybody can say that they are.
So we have two more questions in the chat. I also want to be cognizant of everyone's time. And I think there's a great discussion, so I don't want to stop it. But Nancy asked, how do you think proposals for free preschool would impact the landscape of educational equity? That was the first question.
Mhm. I think it's something that we should highly consider. For example, another true story. There was so I have a 5 and a 7. So at one point they were preschool age. I was in the same school district as my wife, and so we're looking around for preschools, and there was one that we really wanted to be a part of that was like right behind my high school. But in order to get into that preschool location, I needed to um, stand in line and hope that I got in. There were only 3 spots. No, there were 4 spots available to get into this school. And not everybody has the resources or the ability to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to stand in line for this particular place, let alone pay the cost to get in to get in there. And so as I think about, free preschool, I think that'll set up young people to fast track their development, because like kids are sponges at this age. Like they learn, they see, they pick up everything. And so if we can get adequate education starting at the preschool level for all kids, then we're going to give them a leg up to hopefully catch the baton and keep running.
The next question is, what are you anticipating as the impact on kids when the moratorium is lifted on evictions? Is there an expectation of increasing homelessness?
I think all things are possible because I mean let's think about it. Like we have, so with the moratorium on evictions, what's happening with the landlords of these places? Right? Some of them are still paying the mortgage, or they need to do something. So I think it's going to be a trickle effect that's going to hurt the family, and eventually is going to hurt the community that these are happening. So I do anticipate an impact on homelessness to the point where we might need to really start thinking deeply about the McKinney-Vento Act that's out there, where kids, if they're deemed homeless, or their families are deemed homeless, that they still get to go to certain schools even though that they don't live in that particular area. I think we're going to see more of that happen. I do believe we're going to see more families band together because the economy hasn't bounced back in a way that we once hoped. So I think it's going to be a trickle effect on many different things.
So Dr. Field just let me know that his computer is frozen, but I did want to thank the two of you. It was incredible, and we are so lucky that you took the time to do this with us, and we really, really appreciate it. Nancy, Martina, did you want to add anything? So thank you so much, Dr. Diggs. And, I thank Dr. Fields also via text. I'm not sure if he can hear me right now, but his screen froze. So we just really appreciate it.
No,
Thank you
thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you so much.
You all enjoy the rest of your evening. Keep in mind, what are we going to do with our influence, and also our platform. All of you, please continue to do great things, and enjoy your evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
very much, everyone.
Good night, all.
Bye-bye.